We all know that change can be scary, but solving old problems needs fresh solutions. So welcome to Smartsheet Sessions, a new series exploring how businesses and communities can power growth, creativity, collaboration and achievement by transforming their approaches to work. In each session, we'll be joined by a panel of experts as we figure out what should come next for businesses that seek to challenge old ways of working and create new outcomes as a result. I'm Mike Simmons, contributing editor of CIO, and I'm joined by Sue Bonney, who's Vice Chair and UK Head of Environmental, Social and Corporate Governance at KPMG, where she drives ESG as a board priority, and we'll use ESG as an acronym throughout this webcast. We also have chartered business psychologist Michael Costello, who directs Management Today's Workplace Evolution podcast and is an expert on organisational change. And Jennifer Black joins us as well. Jennifer is senior consultant at Salter Baxter, a leading global sustainability consultancy that's helped shape the debate and lead change for the last 2 decades. I'm kicking off this series with a session on business growth. Organisations are turning a corner after the disruption of the pandemic. As businesses move from survival to growth, they must really consider what comes next. And crucially, things can or should go back to how they used to be. Every aspect of how we live and work is now being rethought as people and businesses consider shaping new futures. The phrase building back better has made its way into numerous opinion columns, articles, even election campaigns and government economic plans. But the idea has to be more than just jargon. It underscores the gravity of the moment we're in, allowing us to reflect and to change. So what does it really mean for businesses in 2021? CIO and Smartsheets want to explore the financial, regulatory and ethical imperatives that are driving the challenge of a green agenda. The question for business really, I suppose, is can kinder and more responsible decisions drive green ethical profit? Let's get to it. Gone are the days when rampant growth and profit margins were the only measures of success. Business must now consider climate risk and responsible business principles as they strive to build back better. So let's start with that phrase, Jennifer. What should building back better really mean, and what does it encompass in practice?
Thanks, Mike. Great to be joining you all here today. And that's a great question. I mean, as you say, building back better is really the phrase of the moment, and it's on everybody's lips. And it's about offering us a moment in time to rethink and accelerate progress on sustainability, in particular around 3 aspects: climate, nature, and inequality. And the pandemic and resulting recession has led us all to realize that we now have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to really rethink how we can put the economy back together and whether we can do it in a more environmentally and socially equitable way. And all the research that's emerging is illustrating that we can revitalize our economy and society again by prioritizing spending on initiatives that will lead us to positive ESG outcomes. So essentially, in practice, building back better has implications for how companies both integrate and accelerate actions around a range of ESG issues. And we've already, over the last year, seen a significant acceleration of business action around DE&I, that's diversity, equity, and inclusion. And partly this has been driven in response to the Black Lives Matter movement, but also in response to how unequal the impact of the pandemic has been. You know, it's been particularly hitting the Black, Asian, and ethnic minority communities really hard. So, with all that, there's also a growing interest in both the public and private sector around better understanding and recognizing the value of the environment and how it basically underpins all aspects of our economy and society. And in response to that, many businesses have been setting themselves net zero targets and adopting a natural capital approach, a natural capital lens to their ESG initiatives. And that involves implementing nature-based solutions. So, for example, we're talking about peatland restoration, planting trees, restoring forests, and so on. And these are just, a couple of very small examples of how businesses can help themselves to meet their net zero targets, as well as delivering those other positive and environmental, social benefits.
Okay, Sue. What pressures would you say are driving the need for business to grow more sustainably? And how are the businesses really responding?
Well, it's interesting. The pressure's coming from all angles, but different stakeholders do want different things. So, the banks have a regulator who needs to know how exposed their portfolio is to climate risk. So, if a bank lends to a Californian almond producer who's starved of water in the drought and goes out of business, then the bank takes a hit to its reserves. So it's a question of financial resilience for the bank, and it's one of survival for the grower. And then you have asset managers, funds, and so on. And what they care about is whether the company's a good long-term investment prospect. So if your business is transporting diesel around the country, that will be finite, and unless you've got a good transformation story and you can show how you're going to pivot around your core strengths into a greener market. And if you don't, you won't be investable. And then you've got more and more customers, particularly the young, but not exclusively, and they're making their buying choices on what matters to them. So whether that's carbon footprint of the retail or, vegan food choices, 90% in our latest consumer market survey said that they'd pay more to ethical retailers. So even if they don't all quite mean that, there's still definitely a growth opportunity there. And so on and so on. But the trouble is that can lead to sort of knee-jerk reactions without really thinking through the consequences. So I know a fair few FTSE companies who have bounced into some pretty racy, ambitious carbon zero targets, and they're now wondering how on earth they're going to meet them. And those who I think are handling it the best are the ones who are on the front foot, and they're sort of controlling their narrative much more. I think BP is a pretty good example, just because it's such an extreme transformation to move from being, a fossil fuel provider to being a carbon zero alternative energy provider by 2050. So I am not saying they're perfect, and they were clearly more than nudged into it. But there are some key elements there, I think, which you can pull out. One is that it's an integral part of their overall strategy, and it's not just tactical or something on the side. It's also about real business transformation across every aspect of their value chain. That's from product to customers to processes, culture, behaviors, the whole lot. And to the point you made at the start, it's tangible with an action plan, and it's got milestones in it, and it's got the ability to hold the business to account as well as tell a credible story to their stakeholders.
Brilliant. Well, let me pick that one up with Michael. Actually, it's strategic, prioritized, and authentic. I think are the key ways to do it. You've got more experience than me of how businesses are already tackling change and doing it well. How have they done it? How have they been received when they've done so?
So much that Sue's just mentioned is relevant to that answer, and hopefully I can build on that. There's so many great things happening at the moment, whether it be Microsoft trying to go carbon neutral by 2030, Google offsetting historic emissions, Apple trying to go carbon neutral. I'd like to talk about things from my own experience with my own clients, and one I'm proud to have worked with, which is Nike, actually. They've focused and done very well at looking at change and adapting to change from a societal and an environmental viewpoint. So they have something very exciting around the move to zero strategy. So that's towards zero carbon emissions and zero waste. What I think is really fascinating is that they're not happy to kick the can down the road on this. You can pass the problem down the supply chain, but they've got 650 suppliers in 52 countries, and they're implementing their environmental policies right across the board on that. They're looking at their distribution centers being all powered by renewable sources in 2025. And in terms of products and services, when you look at the innovation on their jersey shirts made out of recycled bottles, I have no idea how they do that, but it's incredible. Look at their trainers. They're made out of recycled polyester. So they continue to innovate, but they don't take their eye off society either. So if you think back 2016, the American footballer Kaepernick took the knee during the national anthem, way before Black Lives Matter actually took place, and not everyone was with him on that in the US. It was a real contentious act, but Nike gave public support on this if you go online, you'll see their Black community commitment and what they're doing to get families out of poverty, families out of debt, children into STEM subjects, capital funding for entrepreneurs. These are very, very real actions that are aligned to a sustainability strategy, that are outlined on the balanced scorecard, which I think Sue is alluding to, getting down into that minutiae, that is really making a huge change. My final point is, it's got to be, the change has to be inside and out on the strategy, because when they went public on that commitment, the employees, surprisingly, were kind of lukewarm. So yes, we agree with the public commitment, but what are we doing internally? That led to a huge external independent audit of Nike's operations, which transformed their recruitment, their internal selection, how they train, and also it led to the appointment of an international and regional lead on diversity and inclusivity. So for me, it's a great example of an organization that's not just a manufacturer. That's not its purpose now. It's transformed to something completely different and something we should be celebrating.
That idea of building back better can really encourage a positive sentiment within your organization, change your organization, and also around the organization. You know, it can increase efficiency, create a kind of culture where people really feel supported again inside the organization. So let's just explore how you really introduce those changes, because you outlined them from Nike at the top down, but the process of delivering the change is so crucial. So, Michael, if you could just come back on that.
Yeah, I think that what organizations overlook is really sound key stakeholder management. And we've seen some absolute disasters of stakeholder management in the internal and external stakeholders. And yes, I'm alluding to the European Super League recently, where I'm afraid greed is good is still alive and kicking in some organizations, sadly. And for me, organizational change at its simplest, I wish organizations would do it properly. Have a vision, have a business case, have an acceptable first steps, and think about the real and perceived costs. None of that was done. Little consultation with what I would describe in a classic sense is initially high interest, low power stakeholders who moved very quickly as a collective to high power, high interest, and stopped the whole change that they wanted to drive. So I think there was an arrogance, there was a lack of diversity at the top, no real clear vision or business case, and the Gordon Gekko brand will stick to those brands for a good while longer.
We're talking about this kind of change, and we talked at the beginning, Sue. We talked at the beginning about measurement, what's measured gets done, and the weaving a green thread through everything that you do, and the importance of reporting to make change a reality. And you're responsible for kind of data capture and evidencing change at KPMG and for your clients. So can you give us some advice for organizations that are looking to kind of instill ownership of these issues and demonstrate that they're getting results and ROI?
Reporting can feel a bit dry or a bit compliancy, but this is all about transformation. And to my mind, a target without a plan is just a number on a page. So data is really critical because it helps you understand how you stack up today as a business and what you can do to move the dial. And I think the other thing it does is give others confidence that you're doing what you say you're going to do. I go back to some of those targets earlier on where people really don't know what they're going to do. I think a really good example of that is gender pay gap reporting, which came in, people will remember a few years back. And when it first came in, companies really struggled. They couldn't get the data. Then they added it up and it gave them a sort of horrible answer, but they didn't know why. And so then they almost had to deconstruct it and then understand what was driving the outcomes. But then that gave them a basis, a real tangible basis for an action plan to improve and do continuous improvement. So I do think it has a real part to play. It's not helpful that the reporting landscape, if you like, is a mess. I mean, there is a minestrone of frameworks and metrics, and if you're not careful, the whole act of capturing data and reporting it to all these different places can choke the business, and it can also steer you into, you know, more of a box ticking mentality. And as we've all been saying, this is about behaviour change, and it's about values, you know, far more than it is around straight compliance. So I think what businesses have to do is work out what are the most important performance measures for them. And then once you've done that, you can set yourself targets, you can get the data to monitor it. And as far as possible, I would encourage people to be looking at that real time, or even looking at predictive data, so that you can use it as an integral part of your business management and decision making, rather than just something that's historical reporting that you throw out and no one really looks at. And I think that the final thing I'd say on data is a lot of this is non-financial data, and people in businesses are pretty keyed up to getting the financial data, you know, and having processes and so on that brings it through and makes it robust. But this non-financial data isn't often subject to that same rigor. And so I think it's really important to build in proper processes, controls, and validation so you don't get caught out. So sometimes you might want some kind of assurance, or you know, you might want to sign up to science-based targets or carbon disclosure projects, so that you get some validation, or, you know, or a combination of those things, because you really do look pretty foolish if you throw something out there and then the first thing someone does is come back and undermine it.
Yeah. So the data is crucial. You want it real time. You want to be forward looking. So Jennifer, as businesses are trying to grapple with that, who in the business really needs visibility of ESG initiatives, and what should they be doing with them?
Yeah, great question, Mike. So, you know, again, sort of building on what Sue has talked about, and what we talked about earlier in terms of the pandemic and so on, you know, it's really excellent that businesses are using this as a moment, as an opportunity to reflect on their purpose and think about whether it still sort of meets the needs through this recovery period. I mean, secondly, or essentially, really everyone in the business needs to have visibility of ESG initiatives. Everyone needs to be educated and engaged. So that needs to happen, like, right down from the C-suite through to the marketing and comms team, procurement, you know, everyone. And for this to really work effectively, an ESG approach needs to embed it throughout the business into all decision-making processes that take place across the business, across a value chain. And this is where strong governance really comes into play. So for example, an increasing number of businesses are focusing on their board composition and looking to bring sustainability expertise in at the board level through the recruitment of what's termed climate competent directors. And building that expertise at the board level is particularly helpful from a risks and crisis management point of view. And the businesses that had those board members in place have actually responded better throughout the pandemic and been able to pivot, you know, in a much more efficient way. You know, so it's important from a risks and crisis management point of view, but also to avoid missing out on those ESG related opportunities in the marketplace, and some of the things that Sue's been talking about. And we're seeing more and more that businesses are recruiting chief sustainability officers, such as PepsiCo and Ralph Lauren, for example. And they're doing that to help their businesses really focus holistically on sustainability and ESG initiatives. And so following the establishment of these roles and building that board expertise, ESG related and policies and those other fundamentals, such as, you know, internal guidelines and so on, those flow naturally, and having them in place really enables the various business units to effectively implement ESG strategies around addressing their key ESG issues as business.
So look, it's pretty clear that businesses must meet the needs of clients that are growing all the time, changing all the time, and also something that I think is massively underestimated, which is the expectations of employees. They're looking to work for value-driven employers. I mean, we all know talent retention has been a major problem for business and technology leaders for many years. And I still hear CEOs and CIOs complain that young staff have no loyalty, or that they don't understand. They've got to be patient and learn the basics of the business. But then I talk to my children and their friends, and that really they've no time and no inclination to work for organisations that don't reflect their aspirations in some way. And those aspirations go way beyond a good paycheck. So for executives and business leaders, right, there's still a balance between the need to lead in their field, to operate profitably, and to protect employees, and to meet the challenges of the green agenda, and meet the demands of some pretty dynamic young people. And then there's the task of measuring, analysing, and reporting on ESGs as well. So look, we've talked about ways to make tangible what can be quite abstract ideas, but let's broaden out the way how we're going to talk about influencing change, because this is the real thing, isn't it? I'll start with Michael. You know, we talk about we've talked about big corporate targets and agendas, and we'll return to that. But how do businesses motivate employees to change their habits? It's not everybody's as engaged as my kids, for example. You know, are we talking about a kind of nudge theory approach to this, or what have you come across?
So what I'd like to see is sustainable strategies really brought to life in regular performance discussions and appraisals. And a good way of integrating a sustainable strategy is actually via a competency framework. You know, when was the last time that you actually had a performance review, an appraisal where those topics actually came up? You could expand that even further, this kind of green thread through to recruitment and selection. So, thinking about the knowledge and the skills that you want on a person spec, a job description that actually relate to sustainability, and having a clear reward and recognition strategy on what you're going to do when you actually see sustainable behavior in the workplace. And that sort of green thread through those elements is really going to ensure that you've got a cultural change that's going to last longer term around sustainability rather than short term. I'd also add, just to again pick up on what you were saying before, Mike, we've got to make climate change a very real concept. And I've got a couple of clients in California who more and more now the conversations are coming through about California forest fires, which are becoming much more frequent. So that's a very real threat, but not all of us have that. Whether it's in the UK, we have our flooding, but it's not as threatening as that at the moment. So for me, leaders really need to have sustainability high on the agenda, to be talking about it, to be bringing it to life, to ensure that we can see, hear, and feel the climate change threat. So for me, that's, we should be relooking at our learning and development curriculum about sustainability. What conversations are we having around that? How are we developing our sustainable skills for the future, as well as driving collaboration between communities, collaboration with environmental groups. So again, we can drive this cultural change, but actually really making the climate change threat more real than it has been before.
No, that's good. Let's Jennifer, I haven't brought you in for a while, so let's look at this question, because you've done a lot of work on change management. How important do you think the clear-cut financial benefits are with ESG and in the initiatives and the reporting? Is it a genuine long-term investment for the business that will deliver ROI? Is it an existential threat to the business if you don't deal with it? How do you win those arguments?
Yeah, great question, Mike. And I think that there's a number of businesses out there that have been particularly hard hit or still reeling from the pandemic, that probably are questioning what is the value in putting finance behind ESG initiatives for us as a business. Maybe they're questioning, is this a priority for them? is this a nice to have, something that can be sort of kicked down the road? But I would say, to my mind, the balance has already tipped from an ESG focus being a nice to have for businesses to it being a must do. And, I think, to give you an example around that. So BlackRock, the largest money manager in the world, they have nearly $9 trillion worth of investments. So they have a lot of influence on what happens. And every year, Larry Fink, he's the chief executive of BlackRock, he writes an annual letter to CEOs. And in this year's letter, he asks companies to disclose a plan for how their business model will be compatible with a net zero economy. So that's very significant because, Mr. Fink's letter, his annual letter has really driven the conversation inside corporate boardrooms for years. Last year, he called on businesses to disclose around their climate impact. And this was answered by a raft of climate pledges by businesses throughout 2020, despite the pandemic. So we saw those emerging January, February. It was really sort of the beginning of the decade of action, and all these businesses disclosing their net zero, and then their net zero ambitions. And then that continued throughout 2020. And a lot of that can be attributed to the actions of influential organizations such as BlackRock and leaders within these investment managers taking that role of saying, okay, we're all going to focus on this. This is where the future lies. Larry Fink wrote last year that the climate crisis is leading to a fundamental reshaping of finance, and said, we know that climate risk is investment risk, but we also believe the climate transition presents a historic investment opportunity. So for me, that in itself is and should be sufficient to motivate a business to focus on strengthening their ESG initiatives for the long term. Because it's sort of get on board now, or be spend your time sort of trying to catch up. And layered on top of this, so there's the investment community, but also there's that societal and climate client pressure and the growing evidence of the direct financial benefits of incorporating ESG. And, we've heard a number of examples today around European and Football League and so on. We will also know that sustainability-orientated funds outperformed market benchmarks last year during the worst of the pandemic downturn. Again, all these things are leading to ESG becoming more mainstream and becoming a financial imperative for a business. And I think, more importantly, we really need to flip this question and ask ourselves, what are the financial risks of not putting in place ESG initiatives? And to the second part of your question, really about the reporting aspect and whether that's important, it is just as important. Transparency has become a fact of conducting business. And ESG reporting is essentially the process around measuring, collating, and disclosing that data related to ESG efforts. And it's a way for businesses, investment funds, governments, and so on, to demonstrate their sustainability performance and track the progress over time. And all this helps with their transparency. Sue talked about the reporting frameworks, and how there's, I think she said, a minestrone soup or an alphabet soup, as some people say, of different frameworks out there. And it is, quite challenging to unpick and decide which reporting framework is the right one for your business. But ultimately, you've done the work as an organization. Now you need to communicate that to your audience, and reporting is a vehicle, a way of doing that. So demonstrating what you've done, your purpose behind it, how you've done it, and more importantly, what were the outcomes of the ESG initiatives that you undertook as a business? How have you performed against those goals, targets set? What progress was made? And then, reporting gives you an opportunity to measure what the businesses are putting in place, and course correct to get back on track where things have not gone perhaps according to plan.
Okay, so look, some ESG measures are easier to spot and implement than others. So there must be some real deep hidden concerns that businesses and foresighted business leaders should be trying to consider as well. Can you just fill us in a little bit on that?
So just to offer up a few thoughts on that, first of all, as my colleague would say, you can't put lipstick on a pig. So in other words, if you're a company that's chucking toxic effluent into the river, it doesn't matter how many recycling bins you put in your offices, that is not going to fix the fundamental issue and cut it with your employees. So it's the whole picture that matters, not just putting lipstick on. Second one is, in a kind of similar vein, just a word of caution on carbon offsetting. So that's where you reduce your footprint, not by taking carbon out of your business, but by paying for carbon positive projects done by someone else. And quality offsetting's got a major part to play. You can buy into some projects that are doing fabulous things, but that's not true in every case. And there are examples of trees being double and triple counted, and so, you know, not unreasonably, the level of public trust is pretty low. And I also think as demand increases, the cost you're going to have to build into your P&L is going to go up exponentially. So offsetting, I think, has a part to play, but it's not a panacea. And then thirdly, this is as much about what you're not doing as what you do. So by all means, shout about the things you can be proud of. So many client conversations I have start off with them telling me these things and that they have a fabulous story to tell, but they're not necessarily getting the credit. But I go back to what I said earlier, be honest about where you're vulnerable across the whole ESG spectrum and spell out your plans to make it better. And then just a final observation, the ESG agenda is an incredibly rich tapestry, as well as the obvious elements like climate and carbon and so on. It covers paying fair wages, it covers responsible tax strategy, diversity of your board, anti-bribery, human slavery, you know, the list goes on and on. And we have an ESG radar on a page, a slide we use with our clients, and it's a pretty busy slide. I mean, there's just thousands of data points on it. And the point of raising that is to say it really is important to think about ESG as not something you do, but everything you do and how you do it. So don't regard this as a checklist that you've got to wade your way through. If this becomes some kind of compliance chore, then you've really missed the point. This is much more about embedding purpose and responsibility into your way of doing business and encouraging a culture and values that really embrace that. And if you combine that with an honesty and an awareness of where you are and where you want to be, like we've been discussing, I think that will take you a very long way, and with your people.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Sue. So dealing with complex multidimensional issues, as we've talked about today, requires good management, clear coordination, and deep insight. It requires leadership and it requires listening. I think today we've confirmed what we really already knew, that change is necessary, but that it's possible. And crucially, we can all begin taking steps towards sustainable growth. Every journey has a starting point as well as a destination. And I'd like to make a final point of my own, if I may. CIOs, business technology and line of business leaders are rightly obsessed with digital transformation. And transformation requires optimization and it requires innovation. And both really are absolutely synonymous with sustainability. And what are the biggest drivers of sustainability for the enterprise? Internally, it's optimizing value chains and operational efficiency, followed by staff satisfaction, and all that brings with staff retention and enhanced customer service and so on. And externally, having clear, meaningful roadmaps and milestones that you achieve lead to more business opportunities, better branding, better compliance, and those are all keys to a successful future. So with that, thank you, Sue Bonney, Michael Costello and Jennifer Black for joining this discussion, and thank you for watching this episode of Smartsheet Sessions. Explore more videos in the series to learn how businesses are tackling old problems in new ways and getting new and I think better results. Visit the Smartsheet website for further insights and what I hope you feel is practical discussion that will help you deliver meaningful change. Thank you.
Move with the rhythm, shake it up, stop when the clock hits 13. You've been working, but you're flirting.